A beautiful house, a sparkling swimming pool, and a body floating in it, the water already turning pink with blood. This is the story of a wife who appeared to weep over her husband's death, when in reality, she was the mastermind behind the bloody scheme all along. In this deadly game of money, reputation, and love, the most innocent-looking character turned out to be the biggest culprit. Hi everyone, this is Alex, and welcome to another episode where I bring you some of the world's most shocking, gut-wrenching true crime stories. Today's story begins in a small town in South Africa, a place that seemed peaceful and prosperous on the surface. But behind that calm exterior was a secret so dark it would eventually shake the entire world. This is a story of wealth, of love twisted into control, and finally, of a horrifying murder that proved sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one sitting right inside your own home. Let's begin this story from where it all started. In South Africa's Northern Cape province lies a small but picturesque town called Pofadder. It may be small in size, but it holds real importance for the local economy and tourism. The surrounding landscape is so stunning that biologists and researchers travel from far away just to study its wildlife and rare plants. This was the place where, in the early 1970s, a family of European immigrants, the Brits family, settled down. The Brits family quickly built a name for themselves in the area. The family patriarch bought or built what became the town's biggest and most well-known hotel, which later grew into a full complex, hotel, restaurant, everything under one roof. In 1976, their first son was born and named Toki, and 3 years later, in 1979, their second son, Leon, arrived. By local standards, both boys were growing up in a fairly wealthy and respected household. Toki and Leon both did well in school, were active in sports, and their parents made sure they received a good education. As time passed, their paths diverged slightly. Toki left town after finishing his studies, while Leon stayed behind with his parents, learning the ins and outs of the hotel business from a young age. He was sharp, detail-oriented, and had a natural entrepreneurial instinct that helped him run the business successfully. When Leon grew older, his life took a new turn, one that began at an event held at their own hotel. The Brits family's hotel complex regularly hosted various parties and celebrations. Among the crowd of unfamiliar faces one evening, Leon's eyes landed on someone in particular, a slender girl with green eyes and a smile that instantly caught everyone's attention. Leon was 25 at the time, successful, wealthy, and confident. By the end of this chapter, everything still seemed normal. A happy family, a growing business, and two brothers making their parents proud. But that night at the party, when Leon spoke to her, he learned she was only 14 years old and still in school. Despite this unsettling fact, his interest didn't fade. Instead, it marked the beginning of a dangerous new chapter. But who was this girl, and why was her own life story so painful? In the next chapter, let's meet Suretha, the innocent child whose fate would one day become tied to this wealthy family. Suretha Kerr was born on September 6, 1990, the youngest of 3 children. Her family also came from Eastern European immigrants, but unlike the Brits family, Suretha's household was drowning in poverty. Her parents had been on the verge of divorce for years, and the atmosphere at home was often tense. Then, when Suretha was only 9 years old, her father suddenly died from a venomous snakebite. This tragedy devastated the family. Her mother was left alone with 3 children, and every child had to work just to survive. Suretha's childhood was filled with hardship and deprivation. In the middle of all this, when Leon entered her life, his wealthy and comfortable world felt like a dream come true. Because of her young age, Suretha didn't fully understand how to respond to attention from a 25-year-old wealthy man.
Leon acted like a man deeply in love. He picked Suretha up from school every day, took her to nice restaurants, bought her expensive gifts, and made sure she had everything she had never experienced before. For a girl who had grown up in poverty, it all felt like a dream. Suretha's mother trusted Leon completely and believed he was a kind and respectable man. Only Leon's parents were concerned because, given Suretha's young age, the relationship could eventually lead to serious legal problems. But Leon always promised that he would wait until she turned 18 and then marry her legally. As time passed, their relationship grew even stronger. But behind what looked like a perfect love story, a life-changing turning point was approaching. About a year later, when Suretha was only 15, she realized she was going to become a mother. Instead of bringing happiness, the news filled her with fear. She kept it a secret for several weeks before finally telling Leon. He took her to a private clinic where they learned that she was expecting twins. Fearing the legal consequences and wanting to keep everything hidden, Leon secretly arranged for the pregnancy to be ended, preventing the babies from being born. For Suretha, it was one of the most painful moments of her life. She wasn't ready for that decision, but because of the pressure and the circumstances, she remained silent. The experience left her emotionally devastated, and from that day on, the trust she once had in Leon was never the same. 3 years later, during her final year of high school, Suretha realized she was going to become a mother once again. This time, what happened next would change both of their lives forever. In the next chapter, discover how this second pregnancy eventually led to Suretha becoming Leon's wife. She was only a few months away from turning 18, so this time the situation didn't seem as dire. But when she told Leon, his reaction was the same as before. He said they were still too young to start a family and insisted she end this pregnancy too. This time, Suretha firmly refused. She made it clear she would not go through with it again, even if it meant raising the child alone. This was a turning point for Suretha. For the first time, she stood up for herself, refusing to bow to either her mother's or her partner's decisions. After some thought, Leon finally proposed properly, placing a beautiful diamond ring on her finger. By this point, the passionate feelings from their early relationship had cooled significantly. But Suretha's pregnancy and her firm refusal left Leon with no other option. As her high school graduation approached, her growing belly became impossible to hide. Finally, once she turned 18, the couple had a lavish wedding. From the outside, it looks like a fresh start. Two young people about to build a life together. But in reality, both harbored doubts about their decision. A few months later, their first son was born, and 2 years after that, twin sons followed. The Brits family now had 3 sons, and from the outside, looks like a successful, happy, wealthy family. But as often happens, behind this facade of happiness were wounds that would only deepen with time. Suretha was now a mother of 3, but the pain, the broken trust, and the sense of being forced into all of it never truly left her. The family's happiness, however, didn't last long. What followed were events that shook the entire household, sometimes in the form of death, sometimes illness. Find out in the next chapter how time began to take its toll on this family. The business that Leon's parents had built over the years continued to grow more profitable with time. Leon expanded his chain of stores and fast food restaurants, and his ventures kept climbing. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but by the mid-2000s, the family began facing a series of hardships. In 2014, Leon's father passed away suddenly due to long-standing heart problems. The shock shattered his mother, and her health began to decline rapidly. Within a short time, she began showing signs of dementia, forcing both sons to place her in a specialized care facility. This was a heavy emotional blow for the family. First the father's death, then the mother's declining health. Around this time, Toki, who had left town years earlier, returned to Pofadder to help his brother manage the business. Together, the two brothers took over running the hotel. It was during this period that Leon also decided to bring his wife into the family business, something Suretha had wanted for years. A mining equipment and tools store was registered in her name, and she threw herself into the work while also raising their 3 young sons. This was also when the family's life became split between 2 cities. Their eldest son started elementary school in Pofadder, but as the twins grew older, the parents needed to find a good school for all 3 boys. Quality education wasn't easy to come by in South Africa. Eventually, they found a good school in a nearby city called Kakamas, about 75 miles from Pofadder. Since daily travel wasn't practical, the family rented a spacious house in Kakamas, where Suretha moved with the boys, while Leon stayed behind in Pofadder to run the business. Because of this, Suretha had to give up managing the store she had come to love. She now devoted herself entirely to raising her sons, only seeing her husband on weekends and holidays. Leon too rarely visited Kakamas due to his busy schedule. At first, everything seemed fine, but over time, the distance between them grew. Their emotional connection cooled, and eventually they were essentially living separate lives, husband and wife in name only. The distance wasn't just physical, their hearts had drifted apart too. And that distance would soon open doors that no one could have imagined. Find out in the next chapter how illness and infidelity pushed this marriage even further apart. In 2018, Suretha's health began to decline, though she didn't take it seriously at first. Tests eventually revealed she had cancer, along with signs of cardiovascular problems. She soon underwent surgery to remove a dangerous tumor, followed by a course of treatment. Fortunately, the timely treatment saved her life, but from then on, she needed regular preventive care at a clinic in Johannesburg, which was quite expensive. The Brits family had more than enough money, and Leon never hesitated to spend on his wife's health. A nanny and a housekeeper were hired to help with the children and household while Suretha travelled for treatment. But by this time, the couple had drifted so far apart that they were essentially living entirely separate lives. On her trips to Johannesburg, Suretha stopped staying in hotels. Instead, she stayed with a man who had become her lover. Meanwhile, compromising photos and messages found on Leon's phone suggested he too was involved with other women. By now, the only thing truly holding them together was their 3 sons. Throughout all this, the family business kept thriving. The hotel, stores, and restaurant chain continued generating strong profits, and Leon invested part of his earnings into real estate in major cities, earning good rental income. The Brits family wasn't just the wealthiest in Pofadder, they were among the most affluent in the entire Northern Cape province. With that kind of wealth came envy, and the number of enemies and ill-wishers grew right along with the business's success. Leon and his family regularly received threats and demands. Leon confided in his wife that he no longer felt safe, worried that someone might try to take everything he had built. Hidden safes were kept in every office, as well as at his home and his parents' home, storing cash in various currencies, diamonds, gold, and important documents. Suretha only knew about the safes located in their own home in Pofadder. At first, these threats worried Leon, but as they became a near daily occurrence, he began to ignore them, assuming they were simply attempts at intimidation, that no one would actually act on them. But fate had a different plan. The night Leon believed everything was completely normal would turn out to be the last night of his life. Find out what happened in the next chapter. It was the evening of October 7th, 2020. Suretha called her husband and told him their dogs had gotten out, as a neighbor had informed her. Leon promised to check on things once he got home and call her back. That call never came. Suretha tried calling him several times, but there was no answer. Worried, she left the children with the nanny and drove to Pofadder herself. When she arrived, the front door was unlocked, but the house was eerily quiet. No one responded to her calls. She walked to the backyard, and there she found her husband's body floating face down in the pool. There were wounds on his back. The water had turned pink with blood. It was clear he was dead. Panicking, Suretha called the police, then the ambulance, then Toki to inform him of what had happened. When the police arrived, they immediately sealed off the house as a crime scene. It was obvious this had been a violent death. The body bore several stab wounds, and there were clear signs of a struggle. One of the house's safes had been opened and emptied. The initial theory was that a burglar had broken in, and Leon, returning home unexpectedly, had confronted them, paying with his life. But one detail stood out. Several other valuable items in plain sight had been left completely untouched. This suggested the intruders had specifically targeted whatever was inside the safe. This wasn't a random robbery, but a carefully planned, targeted attack. News of the murder spread quickly across the media, and social media lit up with speculation. Many people knew Leon had received threats for years, so the early suspicion pointed toward business rivals finally making good on those threats. But the truth was far more complicated and far more painful than anyone expected. And the first step toward that truth led investigators down the wrong path entirely, toward a man who had nothing to do with the murder.
Find out in the next chapter how Leon's own brother became the prime suspect. The strongest early suspicion fell on Toki, the brother who had been running the business alongside Leon for years. Two things made this suspicion stick. First, Toki was the last person known to have visited Leon before his death. Second, their mother's health was failing badly. Doctors gave her only a few months to live, and her will was reportedly kept at Leon's house. Investigators theorized that Toki was unhappy with most of the business going to Leon, and had broken in to access and alter the will. This also explained why the other valuables in the house were left untouched. The real goal wasn't cash, but the will itself. It was also suspected that Toki hadn't acted alone, and that the murder may not have been part of the original plan. Toki firmly denied every accusation. He repeatedly stated that he could never harm his own brother, and that the two had never had any disputes over money or the business. During this difficult time, he turned to Suretha for support. She promised to stand by him, saying she believed in his innocence and would help find him the best lawyer. To anyone watching, this seemed like nothing unusual. A grieving widow standing by her brother-in-law, fighting for justice. But hidden within this picture was a deep irony that no one could see yet. The person who appeared to be the most helpful was, in fact, the true mastermind behind the entire scheme. For nearly 2 months, the investigation stalled. No new evidence, no witnesses, no leads. Police were frustrated, the media kept pushing for answers, and suspicion continued to hang over the Brits family. Then, one day, something happened that completely changed the direction of the case. That something was an unexpected, gut-wrenching confession. A man who walked into the police station on his own and told the whole story. Find out the details of that confession in the next chapter. After nearly 2 months of silence, a 35-year-old man named Jacques van Vieren walked into the police station. He offered a deal. He would confess and name his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. This is where the real story behind the case began to unfold. It turned out Jacques had once attended the same school as Suretha. They were friends and Jacques had feelings for her, though she never returned them. She was already involved with Leon by then. Years passed without contact until they happened to run into each other at a shopping center and their conversation picked back up. At the time, Jacques' life was falling apart. His marriage had ended, he'd lost his job, and he had developed a drinking problem. He desperately needed money. Suretha noticed her old admirer still had soft feelings for her and slowly began confiding in him about her unhappy marriage. She claimed her husband was abusive, but that she couldn't leave him because he had threatened to take the children and leave her with nothing. This struck a deep chord with Jacques, since his own ex-wife had barred him from seeing his children after their divorce. He genuinely sympathized with what he believed Suretha was going through and wanted to help. They exchanged numbers, and a few days later, Suretha called him in tears, telling him her husband had beaten her and that the only way out was to eliminate him. She was extremely convincing, and Jacques believed her, especially once she promised him $500,000 South African rand for his help. Jacques didn't want to carry out the killing himself, so he decided to hire others for the job. The plan was drawn up in early 2020, but the global pandemic delayed everything. During this time, the Brits family business suffered massive losses. A store and several restaurants had to close, and Leon wanted to sell the hotel, something Suretha strongly opposed. By late September, the plan was back on track. Jacques asked for half the payment up front, but due to financial difficulties, Suretha could only give him 100,000 rand along with her own engagement ring. With that money, Jacques hired a friend named Enrich Williams, a man with a drug problem who was willing to kill for money. Williams, however, was afraid he couldn't overpower a strong grown man alone, so he brought in his 25-year-old friend Amantel Bareki to split the payment and the job. Suretha gave the two men access to the house, told them exactly where the safe was, and told them to take whatever they wanted to make it look like a robbery. Her only condition was that the dogs not be harmed, which is why she had already let them out beforehand. Neighbors noticed the dogs loose and called her, which was actually her signal that the men were already inside. Right after that call, she phoned her husband and lured him straight into the trap.
The moment the unsuspecting Leon walked into the house, one of the men struck him on the head with a baseball bat while the other attacked him with a knife, giving him no chance to defend himself. Leon was stabbed 8 times and struck repeatedly with the bat before his lifeless body was thrown into the pool. When the killers opened the safe, they found no cash, only securities, diamonds, and gold bars. Everything was handed over to Jacques, who passed it along to Suretha. The men chose not to take anything else from the house, fearing it would leave behind too much evidence. Their real payoff, they believed, was still coming from the client. But as often happens with schemes like this, greed and fear began tearing the plot apart from the inside. Find out in the next chapter how one man's guilt and fear of what was coming exposed the entire conspiracy. Jacques was never supposed to appear at the crime scene himself. Suretha feared that Toki, who had met him a couple of times before and knew he was her old school friend, might recognize him. But Jacques was so anxious about everything going smoothly that he drove past the Brits' house several times to make sure the hired men were in place and that Leon had arrived. His car was caught on security cameras. The license plate wasn't fully visible, but investigators were interested enough. It was only a matter of time before they traced the vehicle back to him. Meanwhile, once the safe turned up empty of cash and the family's bank accounts were frozen during the investigation, Suretha had no way to pay the men she'd hired. Selling the diamonds, gold, or securities would have exposed her instantly. She asked for more time, but Williams and Bariki weren't willing to wait, and they began threatening Jacques. Unpaid, guilt-ridden, and now genuinely afraid for his own life, Jacques realized he would either end up in prison or end up like Leon. He confided in his sister, who then told their mother. Together, the two women convinced him to turn himself in voluntarily and name everyone else involved, in hopes of securing a lighter sentence. In his full statement to police, Jacques said he believed he had done something noble. He genuinely thought Leon was an abusive husband who mistreated his wife and threatened to take away her children. But as the investigation progressed, the truth came out. It was Suretha herself who had first pointed police toward Toki, using the will and property disputes as a motive. Police brought her in for serious questioning to uncover her true role. It became clear that she and Leon had fallen out of love long ago and were living completely separate lives. Suretha had a lover in Johannesburg she wanted to be with permanently, but when she asked Leon for a divorce, he flatly refused and threatened to leave her with nothing and take the children if she left him. It's hard to say exactly what was in Leon's heart, but it's possible he still had feelings for his wife and hoped to repair their marriage. Suretha, however, had already made up her mind. She believed that with Leon dead, she would inherit everything, allowing her and her lover to live comfortably. She also saw an opportunity to frame Toki and eventually become sole owner of the hotel, stores, and restaurants once her mother-in-law passed away. Her plan might have worked had there actually been cash in the safe to pay off the men she'd hired. The trial for all 4 people involved took place in the spring of 2021. Jacques Van Vuuren, who had cooperated with prosecutors and turned in his accomplices, was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The hired killers, Enrich Williams and Amentli Bareki, were found guilty of premeditated murder with extreme cruelty and robbery, and were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for the widow who orchestrated her own husband's murder, she managed to convince the court that she'd been a victim from the very beginning of their relationship. She testified that Leon had pursued her when she was only 14, and a year later, when she became pregnant, forced her to terminate the pregnancy late term to avoid responsibility. She claimed that in later years, even though the love between them was gone, he refused to grant a divorce and threatened to take the children. The court took her remorse, her emotional confession, and her status as a mother of 3 young children into consideration, and sentenced Suretha Brits to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole. 3 years after her sentencing, she remains behind bars. A story built on wealth, love, and betrayal finally came to an end once the truth surfaced. But its echo is something people still haven't forgotten. This was a story that reminds us that behind wealth, beauty, and a seemingly perfect life, some of the darkest secrets can be hiding. The story of Suretha and Leon Brits isn't just a story about a murder. It's a painful example of the mistrust, greed, and selfishness that can exist within human relationships. If you enjoyed this episode, please give this video a like, share it with your friends, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure you do, so you never miss the next shocking true crime story. This is Alex. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.